Good morning, Sunday School. Doug Griffin, July 4th. Happy July 4th. We're in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 33. And um, so we've been studying Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? The third of the patriarchs. Um, and I like to listen to other people teach some of the same stuff I'm teaching because I want to know, maybe I missed something. Maybe there's something that they may have seen I didn't see, or some research they did. I got to tell you, most people teach this section what I would consider incorrectly. Um, so let's just remind ourselves Jacob is afraid of his twin brother Esau because Jacob tricked him out of giving up his birthright and stole his blessing. Now, God had already said that the older would serve the younger, and Jacob's the younger. So God had already determined who was going to get the birthright, who was going to have the majority of the property. And the way the birthright works, let's say that there's 7 kids. The oldest child, he gets 2/3 of the property because if something happens to the others, like the one of the daughters is married but her husband dies, it's his responsibility to take her in. He has to protect all the others and he takes them in. So um, he's got to have more because if anything happens, this one can't work any longer. He broke a leg, or so it's not like it's some big. I get the birthright. Haha, I'm better than you. It's responsibility, um, which Esau still assumes when he shows up. I mean, you'll see that as far as protecting the younger. But Jake, Jacob wants it. I want to be the one and God's already said the older is going to serve the younger, that the younger will be in charge. So it's nothing he really had to steal, but sometimes we don't trust God. We just don't trust that God's going to do what he said he's going to do. We think we have to help him constantly. We just don't trust. Well, I'll just pray about it and see what God does. No, okay, you should write 5 letters. Now, if God tells you to write a letter, if God tells you do that, God often tells us to do something, although it's often unrelated to where we're going. He just wants to see if we're going to be obedient to him. But if God tells you, but a lot of times it's not God telling us. It's our own minds working overtime. How am I going to get that? How am I going to get that? Okay, I'll do this. I'll do that. And then if you're honest and you look back later after you received it, you'll realize all that effort, all that stuff I was doing, none of that affected. It actually happened because this person I didn't even know showed up and said, "Hey, blah blah blah." You know, it's often we get things in a way that surprises us because God has it worked out. We don't have to work it out. But Jacob thought, like a lot of us, I got to work it out. And he steals the blessing. But did he? Because that only happened because his father, Isaac, was trying to bless Esau. In Isaac's mind, Esau's the one that should inherit everything. Esau, how's Jacob going to protect Esau? It made no sense to him. What do you mean the older is going to serve the younger? Jacob stays in tents all day cooking, and not that there's anything wrong with cooking. And Esau's the one out hunting and conquering, and so it made no sense to him. So he said, "I'm just going to correct." Excuse me. I'm going to correct God because God made a mistake, or you heard incorrectly. Let me pray over this older son of mine and give him the blessing. But he ends up giving it to Jacob and saying exactly to Jacob what God had already said about Jacob. But in Jacob's mind, he's a fraud. He's a fraud. And so, um, he stole this, he tricked somebody out of that. He has an imposter syndrome, which people get when they are in a position that they really don't think they deserve. And they get angry and paranoid, and which is all that he was. So he doesn't understand that he wins in life. He was told from the time he was little, you lose. You're a deceiver. You are the supplanter. You are the heel grabber. You don't really have your own place. You have to steal somebody else's. So in his mind, he's not a conqueror. He's the loser. He's the victim. And when he's on his way to see his brother, not even by choice, but when he finds out his brother's on his way to see him, he prays. Okay, so two things happen. God shows him two companies of angels. Or God shows him one, he calls the place two companies. So either he saw two companies of angels or he said, well, there's one company and I've got a company. So there's two companies here. So I don't know why he called it two companies. I'm thinking he saw two companies of angels. But anyway, that didn't mean anything to him. God saying, dude, look around you, didn't mean anything to him. He still goes to God and he prays and please don't let Esau kill me, basically. Deliver me from this situation. And God's like, I'm not delivering you from this. I'm the one that's walking you into the situation. There are things that we want God to deliver us from. God's like, no, I, this, I need you to go through this. This is going to be good for you. So he divides his, that's why I think he saw two companies of angels, because he then divides his group into two companies and says, well, if Esau comes and attacks this group, at least that group will escape. He doesn't say, we've got a company of angels around us, so we don't need to be afraid. Jacob did not learn the lesson. Jacob didn't learn the lesson. Then he takes his family and he hides them on the other side of the brook. And he's all by himself praying when he's wrestling, finds himself wrestling with a man who later determines is God. And he says, bless me, right? He's wrestling. And when the angel, God's messenger, when the angel who's representing God to him, he's not literally wrestling with God, but the angel is representing, it's like looking at a television set and there's your aunt. Hey, there's Aunt Sylvia. Well, yes, it is, but she's not, the television isn't her, but the television is bringing her to you, right? So that you can see her face. But the television is not your Aunt Sylvia. So the angel wasn't God, but the angel was bringing God's face to him, like a television set. So once the angel who's presenting God to him sees that Jacob is winning and he's letting Jacob win, he then messes up his thigh bone, and but he still kind of lets him win. You know, he's hanging on, but he wants to give him the he wants to recreate the wrestling match that went on in the womb, but this time have him see himself as the winner. Because coming out second to him was a loss, but it wasn't a loss. But that's how he's seeing his life. I always come in second, right? So he's trying to reshape his thinking. He says, I won't leave unless you. And he says, let me go, let me go. This is the angel. He's saying that in order to get a response from Jacob, not because he can't just go. Jacob was not winning, but he wants to get a response from Jacob. And so Jacob says, no, I won't go until you bless me. And then he blesses him by changing his name. Now, he doesn't change him. And whenever I hear this being taught, they teach it as though now Jacob is different. But he changed his name. When God changed Abram's name to Abraham and he became the father of many nations, it was 20 years later before he actually was a father. So it's not like Abraham instantly changed. God just wants you to, he starts planning things way in advance so that by the time the thing actually comes to pass, we're prepared for it. Our mind is actually geared to accept it. So when he changes his name to Israel, Jacob had not changed. Just saying, now you are now God's fighter instead of the deceiver, the name that your parents gave you. I want to give you the real name. Jesus did the same thing with Simon Peter. Simon, which means kind of shifty. Peter means rock. Peter didn't just when he changed his name to Peter, that didn't change Peter. Peter was still bumped out at the end or whatever. He still left, right? He still ran away and he wasn't a rock. He was still Peter. So God's saying, I see things, he calls things that are not as though they were, way in advance of when the final, he sees where we're going and calls us by the name of what we're going to be once we finally manifest what he's put inside of us. So Jacob did not change at all just because he got a new name. And when I hear people teaching this, and yes, and now he was different. Was he? So so okay, you're God's fighter now, but you're crippled. And so after this, well, let's read it. Let's read it because let's examine Jacob's actions, okay? Because it was years before Jacob actually changed, and he had a lot to overcome. So much to overcome. Bless his heart. So it says, now Jacob in chapter 33, I wonder what verse that is. Probably one. Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming. Now Esau's got 400 men with him, and they're walking across dirt, right? So there's like a cloud of dirt. You can see them in the distance because there's 400 people walking across desert, and you know. So they see this cloud approaching. Go, oh my God, he's coming now, which was quite scary. And he says, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants. Okay, you take your two, you take your two, you take you two, and you take your six. Right, Leah, you take your six. So he divides them up, and he put the maidservants and their children in front. So probably Zilpah first, because that's Leah's maid, and he didn't like Leah that much. So Leah's maids first, Zilpah, and then Bilhah, and then he put Leah with her six kids, and then finally Rachel last. So all the kids are lined up. They see a cloud coming toward them. Everybody's scared because the last thing Esau said was, I'm going to kill him. So everybody's scared. I'm going to wait till my father's died, though, and then I'm gonna kill him. So now he's on the way. So they get. I guess father must have died, and now he's on his way to kill us. They don't know anything else because the company of angels and all this stuff that meant nothing to Jacob. He didn't translate that into, oh, God's on my side now. Mm-mm. So he just thought, oh, God's got a bunch of angels. We know God's got a bunch of angels, and we still panic. So just knowing God's got a bunch of angels doesn't mean He's going to use the angels for us in our minds. We don't translate that way. We still panic, right? So Jacob was panicked. And so the kids are looking and going, well, I can see where we rate because Esau's going to get to us first, and then them, and then Leah's kids, and then Joseph last. And so clearly Joseph's the one who's important to him, which was the truth. Jacob was not hiding it. He's important to me. You people are not. That affected them later. And like Jacob's so surprised. I don't know why my kids don't like Joseph. That's just so strange to me. So anyway, um, so Esau shows up, and it says, okay, so he put the maidservants and children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. Then he crossed over this little brook, so they're on the other side of the brook, before them, and he bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. So he's still bowing, please, 7 times. He's just trying to humble himself. But Esau ran to meet him. We read this last week, and embraced him. Like, what are you doing? You're my brother. Why are you bowing to me like I'm some lord or something? And he fell on his neck and he kissed him. And then they both cried. They're crying for two different reasons. Esau's crying, I haven't seen my brother in 20 years. Nobody would tell me where he was because they thought I was going to kill him. I don't know why they thought that. Oh, because I said it. So he didn't know where he was, what he was up to. Nobody knew if he had made it safely. He didn't text them and say, "Oh, here I am at Laban's house." They had no idea, but they weren't telling Esau where he was going. So he's crying, "Oh, I thought you were dead." And Jacob's crying, "Oh, I thought you were going to kill me." So they're crying for two different reasons. Uh, and he lifted up his eyes and he saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" And so he says, well, the children whom God has graciously given your servant, not your brother. I'm not your brother. I'm just your servant. Because he's trying to reverse. He's thinking, I can reverse it. I took his birthright and I'll just say, no, you're the Lord and I'm the servant. But again, you can't reverse what God is. What he didn't understand is God had did that. He didn't do it. He thought he did it. And so that he could now reverse it. So he kept calling, I'm your servant. And then the maidservants came near, and they and their children, and they bowed, and Leah came near and with her children, and they bowed. And afterward, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. And Esau said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? Because you kept sending me things. You kept sending me cars. And also, why were you sending me all this stuff? And he said, these are to find favor in thy sight, my Lord. And so, again, he's just overdoing it because he's like, I still don't believe this person's not going to kill me. But I want him to know that he's the Lord, I'm the servant, right? And Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. But he could have said, I have enough, Jacob. But he's trying to correct him. You're my brother. I'm not your Lord. What's wrong with you? Because Esau was over it because that's how his personality is. That's one reason why God didn't pick him. Not because he gets over stuff, but because Esau lives in the moment. I am upset right now, and he doesn't think of the consequences later. He's not thinking down the road. He's only thinking, I'm hungry right now. So you can have my birthright, you can have my mama, you can have everything. Just give me that oatmeal. Because he doesn't think down the road. Jacob thinks down the road. And so that's the difference between the two. But now Esau's over it. Because Esau's like, oh, I'm not upset anymore. That was a long time ago. Didn't even know what you're talking. Like, why are you crazy? Why do you keep saying all this stuff? So he says, Jacob said, no, please, this is verse 10. If I have now found favor in your sight, if I've now found it, like if you've just suddenly forgiven me, but that's Jacob's mind, then receive my present from my hand as much as I've seen your face, as though I'd seen the face of God. Meaning, God told me that you weren't going to be mad at me, but now it's like God is actually talking to me. I actually see that you're not talking to me. I mean, that you're not mad at me. That, it's like God is saying, see, I told you it's all okay because I did not believe. And you're pleased with me. He can't believe it. So please take my blessing that is brought to you because God is graciously with me. Because remember, I took your blessing, so now you take my blessing. And now it's all reversed. Remember, I stole your blessing? Well, here, have it back. So, because I have enough. So he urged him. So Esau took it. Okay, fine. So you would think in Jacob's mind, so we're all square. But no one said. Now here's what they don't bring up. So about that whole thing about which one of us has the birthright and what? How are we going to handle that? Didn't bring it up. Didn't bring it up. Uh, so Esau said, hey, let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before. So Esau's assuming that they're going to go back home. You haven't been home. We're going to go back and see Isaac and everybody. So let's take our journey. I mean, that's why I'm here. I came to protect you, and I'll go before you because I know I'm the older brother, and so I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm supposed to protect you. So we'll go back. Now we're going to go back through the Midianites and the Moabites and the Ammonites. The Midianites, again, these are Abraham's kids by his second wife, Keturah. That's where the Midianites came from. So they're not that happy with those sets of kids, right? The Keturah's kids are not happy with Isaac's kids, um, Sarah's kids, right? And then you have the Moabites and the Ammonites. Those are Lot's kids. They're not that happy with them. There's not that many of them, but they're not that happy. So it's like, dude, let me go before you. I've got 400 people. We got to go through these lands, and then we're going to go through Seir and Edom. They weren't named Seir and Edom at that time, but that's the place that Esau was going to conquer. And then we'll come and slip in through the backside and see, because this whole mountain range was like divide, and the Jordan was divided in Canaan, and so they're east of the Jordan, and so they're still not really in Canaan yet. And so it says we'll go all the way down the coast, down this mountain range, and then we'll come and see Dad. So, and I'll go before you and I'll protect you. But Jacob said to him, oh, my Lord knows that the children are weak and the flocks and herds which are nursing are with me. Now he's lying. He just ran from Laban, and he had no problem saying, let's go, and getting everybody out and let's go. But now suddenly, the children are weak, and the rocks and the herds are nursing. So, and if the men should drive them hard, just one day, the whole flock, everybody will die. So please just let my Lord go on ahead before his servant, and I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure until I come to my Lord in Seir. So I will meet you. I'm going to walk through the midland of the Midianites and Moab and Ammonite, and then I'll meet you down in Seir. So you just go on ahead of me. Don't worry about me. Why is he lying? Well, certainly it's his way. he thinks that's the only thing he can do. Here's what he doesn't want him to see. I ain't got no hip, and so I don't want you to see how crippled I am, because then you'll know I can't defend myself because I still don't trust you. So I can't let you see this. He's the one that was going to slow down. The kids weren't going to slow anything down, but God had really done a number on him, and he's afraid to let Esau see that. So you just go on, and I'll catch up with you. I'm just going to stand right here. I love this spot. This spot is so, isn't it pretty? I'm gonna hold down this spot right here. You go on, because I gotta watch after the kids and see what happened was right. So he sends him on. Now Esau said, "Well, now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me, because if you're gonna make that trip, I'll leave some of them in, and they'll take their time." But he said, "Oh, what need is there? What need is there? You're about to go through the land of the Midianites, the Moabites, the Ammonites. What do you mean? What need? I'm just gonna leave some people with you." So again, it has nothing to do with the kids. It has nothing to do with the flocks. He doesn't word to get out how crippled he is. So he says, "Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." Psst, just there's no need. So Esau returned on that day. That day on his way to Seir. So he's going down, and it says, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkoth. He went a totally different place because he was never intending on going there. Just lying. So Jacob did not change when God says, "You are now Israel." He's still Jacob. He's not Israel yet. Abram was not really Abraham for 20 years. You know what I mean? And so Jacob has not changed. And so I just odd when people say, he wrestled with God and now he was a different man. Not at all different. Because life has to change you. But God saw what he was eventually going to become and how he was eventually going to yield himself. Okay. So Jacob journeyed to Sukkoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. So he was planning on being there for a while. Now it's about 2 miles south of where they were. It's about 2 miles south. He was in a place that he called Peniel, which means face of God. El is always God, right? So Peniel. And now he goes about a couple miles south to Sukkoth and stops and build a house. He doesn't want to go all the way down. He has his opportunity to go down and visit his father, see if his mother's alive. Uh-uh. I'm staying here because I can't even, this is as far as I can go on this hip, right? So he made a house, built booths for his livestock with like little barns and little things, right, for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Sukkoth. Now, here's where it comes up. This place is mentioned later in Judges chapter 8. Interesting story. So you got Peniel, which is where he met him, and then you got Sukkoth, which is a couple miles south of there. So in Judges chapter 8, Gideon is getting an army together to fight the Midianites because the Midianites are immediately south of there. And Gideon lives up in this area where Jacob is right now. And so it says, when Gideon came to the Jordan, right, that's the river that they're near, he and the 300 men who were with him crossed over, exhausted but still in pursuit. This is Judges 8, verse 4. Now we're in verse 5. Then he said to the men of Sukkoth, so there he is in this place where Jacob settled, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are exhausted, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." Right? So the Midian people came up and they were attacking us, and now they ran back down and I'm chasing them. So can you give us some bread, please? And the leaders of Sukkoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? You haven't defeated them yet. So as far as we know, you can go down there and they might kill you. And so we're supposed to give you bread like you're some conquerors?" No. So Gideon, verse 7, said, "Okay, for this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hands, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. I'm going to come back and get you because I'm trying to protect you. The Midianites came up here and you can't even just give us some bread." Arr, he's really mad. Okay. So then he went up from there to Penuel, right? So that's why we know Sukkoth is south of Penuel, because he went up a couple miles to Penuel. That's the place where Jacob had wrestled with God. And he spoke to them in the same way. Can you give us some bread? Because we're going to go chase the Midianites who were south of us. They're like, you came up, you should have gone after the Midianites. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered and said, no, not until you defeat them. Right. See, you got 300 people and there's 1,000 Midianites. You looking stupid. You think we're going to give you some bread? So he also spoke to the men of Penuel, saying, when I come back in peace, I will tear down this tower. And sure enough, he did. With 300 men, he went down and defeated. God only wanted him to have 300 men. That was on purpose because God wanted to get all the credit. He had 300,000 men or something, or 100,000 men, which God reduced to 300 because God wants to get all the credit. Otherwise, you think we won because we had all these people. So a lot of times God will shrink right before he's about, not he won't shrink, but he'll shrink your numbers, he'll shrink your resources right before he's about to do some major thing so that you won't think it happened because of all this effort you put in. You're thinking, oh my God, there was 30 of us, there's only 6 of us now. And so, uh, how are we going to happen? And in fact, like at my church, God's about to do all these major things. And, after the pandemic, not very many people have come back yet. And you think, well, how is God going to do it with these few people? And I'm like, oh, this is what God loves this. You mean there's only a few people there? Now I'm about to do a whole bunch of stuff. This way you can never credit yourself. You can never say, well, there's 500 of us and we all get, there was only 8 people and God did that big miracle. So that, because he wants to get all the credit. He wants to get all of the credit. God is a glory hog. Amen. So Gideon's got 300 people. He goes down and defeats the Midianites. And sure enough, he comes back and he does what he said. He attacks the people at Sukkoth. He attacks people at Penuel and smashes the tower and says, ha, 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 I told you. Okay. So way down in verse 30 of this same chapter in Judges, it says Gideon. Now, I just mentioned this because it applies to what's about to happen next. So Gideon had 70 sons who were his offspring, for he had many wives. 70 sons. Okay. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son whose name was called Abimelech. So Shechem is the city that's across the water, Shechem. And this is where Jacob's about to go. And that's not a good thing. Abimelech is this. So Shechem is not a good place. And this is like Lot going to Sodom or Gomorrah, right? Shechem is not a good place. The Canaanites are there. And so it says that Jacob goes to, so back to Genesis chapter 33, now I'm in verse 18. It says, then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. Okay, so he was in Sukkoth for a while. Now, it's a 10-year period because when Joseph is about 6 years old, when he leaves Laban. So remember, for 14 years, Jacob had kids. He had 11 sons between the 2 wives, and then he was ready to go. And he asked Laban, so Joseph has just been born, and then he asked Laban and Dinah. Joseph and Dinah were the last 2. So the same year that Rachel had Joseph, Leah finally had a girl named Dinah. Now, she may have had other girls that they just don't tell us because for some reason they didn't think it was important. So we don't know, but we know she had Dinah the same year that Rachel had Joseph. So they're both about 6 years old. So they're babies, remember, and Joseph goes to Laban and says, I'm ready to leave, give me some pay. And he says, no, but you can work now for money, now that you've got your wives and, you've done 7 years each. So he works for 6 years and he gets all this livestock and all this stuff. And then he makes like a banana and peels out. No, then he leaves, right? It splits. Thank you. Make the tree and leave. Okay. So then he gets out of there. And so that means Joseph's about 6 years old. Well, there's a 10-year period to go by. So now Joseph is about 16 and Dinah's about 16, somewhere around there. And in a year, Joseph is about to be sold off to slavery, etc. But we know when he came to Shechem, he had been in Sukkoth for about maybe 8 years or so, waiting for his hip to heal. So he didn't go anywhere. He's waiting for his hip to heal. His kids are getting older. Um, some of his kids are 14 years older than Joseph. Like Reuben, his oldest, was uh, 14, was 20 when they left, and Joseph was 6 when they left, right? So the kids have gotten older, and now he comes to Shechem. So in verse 18, it says, Then Jacob came safely. That word safely is taken from the word shalom, which means came in health. It doesn't, he says safely, but you could have pronounced it came healthily. Shalom is peace and well-being and health. He's finally healthy after all that time. From his hip is doing well enough for him to travel again. Because again, from Penuel, he went about a mile down to Sukkot and build a house and say, "Oh, I got to rest up until this heals, until my settlement check comes." And so finally, his hip is better, and it's about 8 years. He goes to Shechem. Okay, so this is now. He says Jacob came safely, but he means healthily, to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And this is similar language. It says and Lot came and pitched his tent outside of Sodom, and the Canaanites were there. It's got the same kind of ominous warning. Now, um, Shechem becomes a major player in Bible lore in Joshua chapter 24, verse 32. When they have crossed back over after they've been in Egypt and they're about to go, right? Joseph is alive now. He's about to be sold into slavery, and the children of Israel are about to spend 400 years in Egypt and then come back. When they come back in Joshua 24:32, it says, The bones of Joseph, which the children of Israel had brought up out of Egypt, they buried at Shechem, in the plot of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of silver, which had become an inheritance of the children of Joseph. So when they brought his bones back 400 years later, Joseph, they buried him in Shechem, right? That was and they knew this became, why did they connect this to Joseph specifically? Will be interesting, and we'll see why. Also in Jesus's time, because Jacob also built a well at this land near Shechem. In John chapter 4, verse 5 says, So he came to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, which had formerly been called Shechem. Just over the years, this is like 1,000 years later, it's now called Sychar, but it was called Shechem. Near the point of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. So it's the same. So Jacob dedicated that land in Shechem to Joseph, gave it to him. His bones are buried there. So Jesus comes to the city in Samaria, and now Jacob's well was there. So he built a well. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour, and a woman of Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, Give me a drink. And, they had that whole conversation, and should we worship here? Because, this is where Jacob built his well. And so that, interestingly, this place outside of Shechem was kind of this famous place that they talked about, very associated with Jacob and Joseph. And we'll see why. So back to Genesis, right, chapter 33. In verse 19, it says, And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father. So Hamor's the father, Shechem's the son, and Hamor loves his son Shechem so much that he names this little town after him. And all his kids are there, and all his kinsmen and cousins, and they're all living in this little town called Shechem, but they're Canaanites. Oh, and Jacob goes and buys a piece of land. Now again, Jacob is not thinking about going back home to Jacob. I keep saying Jacob, to Isaac, to his father, because Esau is there, and they never worked it out. So Jacob is not, this is not like 8, 9, 10 years now. And in fact, I'm gonna buy a piece of land. Abraham had bought a piece of land where he wanted to be buried, and Jacob's like, I'm gonna buy this piece of land right here, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna go back down there to visit because that's Esau's land, and he kind of just let it go. That's significant. I got to tell you, that's significant. That's why God appears to him again later and says, "Hey, I've given you this land." So this land in Shechem, let's. Here's when we first came into this land became introduced to us was when Abraham first came into Canaan. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 4, God had just spoken to Abraham and says, I want you to start walking. He's up in Syria where Laban lived. So now he's walking. And it says, verse 4 says, so Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. That's where Laban was. Then Abraham took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran. And they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. And Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were there in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your descendants, I'm going to give this land. So God hadn't said anything to Abraham. He just said, start walking, right? So he's walking south from Syria, where Laban lived, where his family was. And finally, he comes to the land of Canaan. And as soon as he gets to Shechem, that's when God finally says something. That's when the GPS finally says, hey, turn left, or, right? So God hasn't said one word to him. When he gets to Shechem, he tells him to stop. It says, this specific land I am going to give to you and your descendants. And there he built an altar to the Lord who appeared to him. Like, oh, good, God finally spoke again. So the first place that Abraham built an altar was Shechem. Well, sure enough, his grandson Jacob comes to Shechem and buys a piece of land. And God had said to Abraham, I'm giving this land. And he was talking about that specific piece of land. He also meant all of Israel, all of Canaan, I'm going to give to you. But he had him stop there because this land's going to become significant. So Jacob, 100 years later, probably 150 years later, uh, he comes to Shechem. He buys that land from the Canaanites. Okay. By the way, in Genesis chapter 37, verse 12 through 13, it says, then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So Joseph is sent to look for, like, where are your brothers? Jacob says to Joseph, now that he's 17, a year later. So from a year from now, they're going to be back down in Hebron, down south. And the brother's going to go up to Shechem, where he's purchased some land. They're going to go up there. And his father's, and it says, and Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he sends them back up to Shechem. So, and that's where Joseph is captured and he disappears, and they don't see him for another 13 years, right? And so that place became like a memorial to Joseph. Yes, this is where we don't know where he is. They knew where he was. This is the place where he was killed. And so that's why that became like Joseph's plot of land. Even though Jacob had bought it, it was dedicated to Joseph, and he mourned him there. And oh no, this is where my son was killed, here in Shechem. Okay, so when they brought his bones back 400 years later, they buried him in Shechem. Okay, Joseph, this is your place. This is dedicated to you. All right. So um, he buys a piece of land for 100 pieces of silver, whatever kind of their money is, 100 pieces of whatever their money was. And in verse 20, he says, then he erected an altar there and called it El Elohe Israel. God is the God of Israel. So you're my God, and I'm accepting my new name, Israel, although I'm not acting very Israel-ish. I'm still acting kind of Jacob-ish. So he erected an altar there, and ironically, his grandfather had erected an altar in that same place 150 years earlier. Not ironically, it's not a coincidence. God just works everything out. And now, I want to talk about Jacob and how long it took him to become Israel. Jacob didn't have any kind of relationship with God similar to the one that Abraham and Isaac had. Jacob, bless his heart, had a hard time. He did not change after that wrestling with the angel. He didn't change for a long time, right? And he never really changed his attitude about his life until the very end, when 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 Jacob finally went down to Egypt. They once they discovered that Joseph was actually in Egypt and he was still alive, Jacob went down to Egypt. And in Genesis 47, verse 12, excuse me, it says, Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How old are you?" Because he was looking kind of old. And like, boy, you've been through a lot. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years." And he's thinking, dang, you'll get about 180. Okay. So he says, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. And they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. Like, so, because Abraham had lived to like 180 and Isaac lived to 190. He says, I'm only 130 and I can tell I'm ready to die. So my years have been few in comparison to them, and they've been evil. My year. So at the end of your life, if you look back and say, "Oh, my life has been evil," that's not good. So Jacob didn't go through some big transformation. He was tortured for a long time, but God still chose him because he was able to look forward. Well, and also because none of this made any difference to Esau. Esau could care less about the family history. At least Jacob cared about it. Esau did not, right? And sometimes you have kids who want to carry on the family traditions and carry on the family name. And sometimes you have kids who want to do their own thing. They don't want to be encumbered by, yeah, my daddy was an oil billionaire, but I want to go sell shoes or something. And they try to make their own mark. And there are Hollywood kids who change their name to something else because they don't want anybody to know that their daddy's that famous person or their mommy's that famous, right? So Esau could care less about their family lineage. Jacob cared. That's why God picked him, but not because he was this great, wonderful, incredible person. Jacob was a mess. Case in point, I will show you. We will begin our discussion. We're just going to start peeking into Genesis chapter 34. It says, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. So they're living in Shechem, right? So she's about 16 or so. And she went out and said, I'm gonna check out the Canaanite women. These are the very women that Isaac and Rebekah told Esau not to marry. Please don't marry Canaanite women. Oh my God, and he went out and married two of them. And because he could care less, right? Right? And they sent Jacob to live with Laban because you need to marry one of our relative, because the Canaanites. Now again, this is the Canaanites. It's not the children of Ham. Canaan was one of Ham's kids, but there was the Cushites and all these other people, the Egyptians, the Africans. They are children of Ham. They are not Canaanites. Canaan's kids founded Sodom and Gomorrah and did all that other stuff. They were crazy. So it's like, stay away from the Canaanites. Those are the people, the children of Canaan, you got to stay away from because something's wrong with Canaan, but not the other kids of Ham, right? So, because God blessed the Egyptians, civilization went on for, millennia. It was powerful and conquered the world. But the Canaanites, they were always in trouble. So, for Dinah to go out and check the daughters of the land, which is the Canaanite women, that's not good. That's not good. So, and the way in the Hebrew that this is expressed, went out to see the daughters of the land, it meant that she was up to no good. Now, the problem for me is because I read a lot of commentaries about what was she doing out there, and how come. I'm thinking, why did Jacob let her out there? Why wasn't he supervising her better? Why wasn't he talking to her and explaining, don't go here and you got to watch out for this? So a lot of commentaries wanted to, Dinah got herself in trouble, which she did. But I want to equally point out that Jacob has become this absentee father. In Jacob's mind, His only true child was Joseph. He did not understand that God had given him Leah, that God had given him Zilpah and Bilhah, and though they were all his children, and that he was responsible for all of them. In his mind, he was tricked into them, and so they didn't count. And sometimes in our lives we think we fell into a situation that we really aren't supposed to be in. you know oh man, I was transferred to this other office and I wanted to go over, to be in Washington DC, but God transferred me, not God, my boss transferred me to this little podunk office, and blah blah blah, right? And we think we're in some place where we're not supposed to be, and so we don't appreciate it, we don't cultivate it, we don't say, no, God has me here. This is for whatever reason, God allowed me to be here, so He's got something good for me. It's when it says, in everything gives thanks, in every situation give thanks. Say, okay, God, not for every situation, but in it, you're saying, Lord, I know that you somehow allowed this situation to happen, so show me what the good of it is. How is this going to work out together for my good? Why do you have me here, and what can I learn from it? Okay, I'm here in prison. Who am I supposed to meet while I'm here? Who am I supposed to witness to? What am I supposed, I'm here in the hospital. What am I supposed to, we can look at the situation and be mad the whole time, or we can look at it and say, no, God has me here. But Jacob looked at his other kids and thought they were the mistake. And that's when we teach it, when Laban tricked him into marrying Leah, but really Rachel was the one he was supposed to have. he, Laban might have thought he was tricking him, but if God allowed it, if God didn't just give Laban a heart attack right there and stop it from happening, then then God somehow has something He's going to make of it. And so Jacob never looked at it that way. Dinah was Leah's daughter, and so he didn't pay any attention to her. We know he only paid attention to Joseph. He made Joseph a coat. He fawned over Joseph, right? And the other kids, he just said, well, oh well, good luck. So she's out there on her own, out to see the daughters of the land, because Jacob never gave her any instruction. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, so he's the prince of this country, this little, now not there, there's not that many people in it, but he's the son of Hamor, right? And Hamor named a town after him and made him the prince. And it's everything that Jacob was afraid would happen when he went down to Egypt. It's what Isaac was afraid would happen when he went down to Egypt. The prince of this person is going to take my wife and just sleep with her. And so I'll tell him you're my sister, right? So when he sees her, he's the prince of the country. He took her and he lay with her and violated her. She's just 16. You don't sleep with people unless you're married to them, and you don't just overpower them and force them. However, his soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman, and he spoke kindly to the young woman. So even though he violated her, he then fell in love with her, to compound it. And so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this young woman as a wife." Now it's interesting because he doesn't say, "Father, please." He has this huge ego, and he thinks he can have whatever he wants because his father named the city after him. So you have to be careful how you teach your children, because you can make them think more highly of themselves than they should. Or you can make the opposite and make them think that they're nothing and not worth anything. And so there are women today whose fathers didn't take the time to tell them, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, you're lovely, you deserve the best. I loved you, and they didn't take the time to really instill into that woman how valuable she was. And so they go out looking for it other places. And sometimes the first man who comes along who says, "You're beautiful, you're one," all the things that the father should have said, then they're vulnerable to that, right? And so you can make a child think that they're incredibly valuable, or you can sometimes make them think they're worthless. So we have to be very careful with what we're saying to our children, right? So Jacob heard that he had now, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. So when Dinah left, some of her maidservants went with her, because Jacob's got a big, huge company. So the maids have their own maidservants. They came back and reported to Jacob what had happened to Dinah. And Dinah's still there. He's still got her. He's still holding on to her. So he hears what happens. And Jacob, of course, was all upset. No, Jacob doesn't respond at all. And we're going to talk about that next week. He's frozen. He doesn't have a response to it. Now it says, now his sons, which were with his livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace until they came. But even when they came, he didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. So we'll start from there next week because Jacob is again thinking, this is not my responsibility. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to have this. I was supposed to have that car and I got stuck with this one, so I'm not going to take care of it. And that's what we do. We think in ourselves, I wasn't supposed to have this job. I was supposed to have that one. So we're goofy in that job and we're slothful because, I wasn't supposed to have this house. I was supposed to have that house. So we don't take care of it. Or I wasn't supposed to have whatever. And so he doesn't take care of these kids because he thinks Joseph's the only one I'm supposed to have. These others are mistakes. And as long as we think that way, we're slothful. We got to understand that there aren't things that are happening outside of God's purview. God's not going, oh man, how'd that happen? Uh-oh, well, you just have to put up with it until I can figure something out. There's nothing that happens that God hasn't allowed to happen and that he doesn't already have a plan for. And somebody may have done something dastardly in order to make it happen, but God still allowed it. And so therefore he's aware and has a plan in it. And that's what the angel was trying to get over to Jacob. You prevail. You prevailed. You're God's fighter. There aren't situations that you're in where you're the loser. But if we think we are, we're going to respond a certain way. If we think we're the winner, we're going to look for the answer. Okay, I know something good's going to come of this. But if we think we're the loser in a situation, then we're just going to freeze. We're just going to, oh well, and whatever happens, I don't. And we detach ourselves. We detach and remain silent, and we become we're absent in our heads from the situation because we don't really think that we're supposed to be in it. So that's where Jacob is. I'm going to leave it there because we're going to investigate this whole thing that happened, and it's kind of a stunning, kind of disturbing chapter of how Jacob reacted and how his sons reacted. So thank you so much for listening in today. Um, and I will see some of you next week. I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend and stay safe and all that stuff. And others of you I'll see on Wednesday as Jesus is on his way to Golgotha. All right. Thanks so much and God bless.